Hello, and welcome to And the Runner-Up Is. This week on the show, we'll travel back in time to the 16th Academy Awards, which awarded the films of 1943. Henry King arrived with a religious drama about Bernadette Soubirous, the real-life woman who had a vision of the Virgin Mary. The film, The Song of Bernadette, starred Jennifer Jones and became a sensation, earning 12 Oscar nominations and 4 wins. But it was another film, Casablanca, that won Oscar voters' hearts even more, taking home Best Picture in the end. So why did The Song of Bernadette come up short? We'll explore all this and more as we discuss how the Oscar almost went to The Song of Bernadette. Hello, and welcome back to And the Runner-Up Is. I am your host, Kevin Jacobson, and today we have reached 1943 at the Oscars. A very exciting year because Casablanca is the winner, one of the most beloved Best Pictures of all time. But this is the first year since, as I'm going backwards, since 2009, where the Best Picture nominees are 10 instead of 5, so there's quite a bit to cover. And today we're talking about The Song of Bernadette, which is very exciting. And I have brought on a lovely guest, a columnist for Classic Movie Hub and a co-host of the Ticklish Business podcast, a real classic film geek, you could say, based on her Twitter handle, Samantha Ellis.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Yes, I'm very excited to have a classic film geek, as I said, to talk about this very fascinating year at the Oscars.
Yeah, I mean, just looking at the list, I mean, just the fact that there is 10, like you said, it's a lot to take in, but I feel like they each kind of have their own reasoning for being on the list, and it's just a really varied, fascinating span of films to go over.
Yeah. And what I always love with years like this is that it feels like this is a real time capsule of 1943, of what we were thinking about, what we were valuing in film. So I'm excited to get into it.
Absolutely.
So, as I said, the film we're talking about today as the runner-up is The Song of Bernadette. So let's get into a quick summary of the film. It is a biographical drama about the life of Bernadette Soubirous, who was a young woman in Lourdes, France, who was living close to poverty with her family, and she goes to a grotto where she has a vision of a woman glowing in white light, who seems to be some kind of divine presence. And this woman eventually tells Bernadette that she is the Immaculate Conception. And there are soon a lot of miracles that happen around Bernadette as she becomes a bit of a sensation, and she's also met with some skepticism from the town officials who try to make her prove herself over and over again. And the film goes through Bernadette's life as she keeps having these visions, and she eventually becomes a nun. The film was directed by Henry King, written by George Seaton. It stars Jennifer Jones as Bernadette, William Aith, Charles Bickford, Vincent Price, Lee J. Cobb, Gladys Cooper, and Anne Revere. And The Song of Bernadette made $12 million at the box office, and it was nominated for 12 Academy Awards, the most of any film that year, winning 4, also the most of any film that year, but not Best Picture. So, The Song of Bernadette, it starts with a little quote at the beginning that's quite interesting that says, "For those who believe in God, no explanation is necessary. For those who do not believe in God, no explanation is possible." So very intriguing, sets things up in an interesting way. So Samantha, what are your thoughts overall on The Song of Bernadette?
I went into this film pretty blind. I had not seen it before. And it had been on my watch list for sure. Kind of for an interesting reason. I actually am a really big fan of Patricia Morrison. I always have like a really deep connection to the stars that are still around, or at least were still around. And she passed away only a year or two ago. And every time I would look her up, because I was such a big fan, she's like a really beautiful, really underrated actress. This movie would come up. And I was like, oh, I have to see it. She's in that. And I found out, of course, that she's like barely in it. Yeah. But so that was actually oddly my draw to this film for the most part. But honestly, there are things that I love about it, and there are things that don't really appeal to me personally. Like, I think the cast is just something to be kind of awestruck over in the first place. Like, it's really eclectic. I mean, you've got, of course, Jennifer Jones, and this is the film that really introduces her as a screen personality. And, of course, Anne Revere, who I think of, in association with National Velvet.
Yeah.
And Charles Bickford, Lee J. Cobb, Vincent Price, Gladys Cooper, Sig Regman, even Linda Darnell plays the Virgin Mary in a couple of scenes. So it's almost like they put all the names of a bunch of 1940s personalities into a hat and just started choosing some because it seemed so random. But yeah, I really love the cast. And one of the things that really struck me about the movie is the cinematography by Arthur C. Miller. Really, the only other film that he had done that stood out to me was How Green Was My Valley. But like when I watched this film, it really stood out compared to a lot of the other aspects of the film. Mm-hmm. Like especially the scene where Vincent Price approaches the grotto. That one really stood out to me. And honestly, as far as the film itself, what I think of it like I said, it doesn't really appeal to me personally because I'm not personally very religious. I think you kind of have to have that interest either in religious history or in religion itself. And so that wasn't really there for me. I'm more focused on the performances and the action rather than the meanings and really reading into it.
Yeah. And I think I'm probably on the same page as you as far as just I'm not really a religious person myself. I did grow up going to church, so I feel like I sort of understand what I guess both sides of the conflict that's presented in the film are coming from. I think that the film is solid, but not spectacular. For one, right. I do think the length of the film is really not justified, to be honest.
I completely agree with that. I think that was the scariest thing going into it.
Yeah, because 155 minutes.
I watched this as part of a very strange double bill because I had just finished In a Lonely Place for my own podcast. And then so it's like 4 a.m. by this point, and I'm like, okay, time to start Song of Bernadette. That's like 2 hours and 40 minutes.
Yeah. Whoops. Yeah.
And I was like, oh my goodness. Okay. So yeah, that combined with the fact that the religious themes weren't really my cup of tea. Some scenes definitely felt like pulling teeth. It's almost like, okay, let's pick up the pace a little bit. But I did like certain parts of it. Like I can't really specify what. But yeah, I think Jennifer Jones is just really compelling as an actress, and this is a really great debut for her. And I love seeing Vincent Price in anything, especially this young. Mm-hmm. So that's always like a fun little gem. And he plays such a good villain, not quite a villain. There isn't really much of a villain in this film. There's just a little bit of opposition. Mm-hmm. But yeah, there's things to like and things to not like.
Right. Yeah, we can certainly get into that. I mean, I think it can be quite repetitive a little after a while with Bernadette, having a vision and the men of the town doubting her, and she proves herself to them and they still doubt her, and there's not a lot of variance in that like first 2 hours of that conflict. And I think maybe if this was cut down to even 2 hours, I think that is more than enough time, even though I like some of the world building and how this sort of affects the other people in the town, I think some of that could be maybe cut down. And I also think the film spends a lot of time talking about Bernadette and talking about her almost like more than we actually see much from her own perspective, like how she's grappling with all this attention that she's attracting. And that is sort of touched on, but we have just so many scenes with like Vincent Price and the rest of the town officials just talking about this situation, where I think I'm more interested in just how she is feeling and what her journey is. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. I think that's such a good point. I think one of the things, now that you mention that, there's a film that there's some comparison in my head, and I have the same gripes with this film as I do with Passion of Joan of Arc.
Oh.
It kind of makes me think of that because, again, you have the very strong religious themes, and it's a similar situation of, you know, of course, Joan of Arc's story and Bernadette's story, where she claims to see a religious figure, and you have all of these old men saying, no, you didn't see it. And it's just this back and forth the whole time. Mm-hmm. So there are definitely some similarities there that I kind of drew, and I have the same issues with both.
Yeah, I mean, I really think Jennifer Jones is just so good here that I almost did, even though she's the main character here, just want even more from her. Like you
Absolutely.
said, the film introduces her as introducing Jennifer Jones. Technically, this is her first film as Jennifer Jones, but she had been in a few movies before, just credited as her real name, Phyllis Isley, I believe. But for all intents and purposes, this was her big introduction, and you can just really see how she could become this movie star overnight upon people seeing this, because she just has that like luminous air to her.
Yeah, there was one quote in particular that I thought was really interesting, talking about the audition process. Yeah. I mean, she beat out a lot of other actresses for this part, and really the reason why, according to director Henry King, who I'm a really big fan of because he directed my favorite actor, Tyrone Power, in a ton of films. But he directed the screen test with Jennifer Jones for this film, and he instructed each of the actresses that he auditioned to look at a shining light. And Jennifer Jones, according to him, she didn't just look, she saw. Oh. And I could that definitely resonated with me when I watched the film and watched her facial expressions. Mm-hmm. I really think that she has, not only does she have the innocence necessary for this part, I think she has the real, for lack of a better word, faith. Like, you can tell that she believes what she sees rather than, oh, that's a pretty light, you know?
Right. And I think her best moments actually are when she is desperate for just a sign, you know, like when she's digging through the mud in that moment, or when,
oh, that's a great scene.
Yeah, or when she's in bed hoping to see a vision again towards the very end. I think she exudes like that sense of desperation that it was weirdly sort of described almost like a romance in a few readings that I've seen about this film, just about like how she just keeps wanting to see this woman again. You know, it's really interesting.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's definitely a really great point. I think the scene with the dirt and her discovering the spring is really poignant. I think that it's so interesting to watch because this whole time we know that she sees this lady. Yeah. But of course, you know, in the town there's a lot of doubt and a lot of skepticism. But it's so interesting because they spell it out for the audience that she does see the spirit, but there's so much secondhand embarrassment for her when she's digging and she's rubbing the dirt and the mud on her face. Yeah. And it's like for a split second, even we who have seen the spirit doubt her, and it's like, oh, she looks really crazy right
Yeah,
now.
I remember watching that scene, and it has such the use of music is so like swelling and beautiful and like this divine moment. But then I'm just like picturing if you don't have music there and you're just like watching it from afar, and you're just watching this woman just searching around and like smearing mud on her face. It's like
That's
a
such a
totally
good
different reading.
point.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the other things that I really like about this film too. I think it has a really, really great score.
Hmm.
And it's funny that you mentioned that because I wouldn't have thrown that out there. But yeah, that was something when I was watching it last night that I really loved about it. And yeah, that definitely would make a huge difference in that scene in particular.
Yeah, almost plays like a comedy if you're just watching it from afar.
Oh, absolutely.
Um,
I mean, a lot of the parts of this film really do.
yeah.
Because again, there's so much doubt from other people about what she sees, and like, you if this whole film didn't have a score, you would literally like just random silent parts of her like kissing rocks
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
like
I
all
would
kinds of
I would
crazy
just
things.
like to see the dailies of this with no score.
Absolutely.
Oh man. Yeah. Well, speaking to just that sort of conflict there, I see a lot of the skepticism and where that comes from as someone who's just more of a realist sort of kind of person. But then I also understand faith and trusting signs that you can't really prove with logic, and how faith can be like this beacon of hope, especially for this community that is more impoverished, with like a kid that is unable to walk or a man who's blind. These moments of how faith can really serve this purpose in people's lives during these hard times. And I think that the film does provide somewhat of a complex look at faith versus skepticism and realism, because there are those moments when you see some real miracles happen, whether it's, like I said, the kid being able to walk, or a blind man being able to see light. And you can be like, wow, this might be legit. Like, this is a miracle. But then we also have a counterbalance at the same time, where the doctor is explaining away that the blind man is seeing light just kind of as a scientific thing that can happen, or the kid's fever wasn't that bad to begin with. And so in that way, I think it allows the viewer to maybe make up their own mind in the end. And it does sort of have it both ways, like that quote in the beginning of saying, if you believe in God, there's no explanation. These are miracles. But for those who don't believe, it's kind of, you can't really explain what this is. Did that really resonate with you?
Absolutely. And I think that's such a good point too. Not only, I mean, in the film it's sort of spelled out to us that a lot of these things are miracles, or we're led to believe that they are. But at the same time, I think specifically the actors that they chose to play the skeptics and who have the lines that really talk about atheism and why they don't believe that these things are real and these things are happening. I think that's really compelling because you have Vincent Price and Lee J. Cobb as the main two skeptics, the main two, non-religious figures in this film. And they both, know how to deliver dialogue.
Oh, yeah.
For sure. They're two of the best actors of the 20th century, in my opinion, easily. Oh, yeah. And I think that that's such a great choice. Both of the choices are really great because they're compelling. This film isn't trying to a certain extent, it's not trying to shove religion down your throat.
Right.
Because you still have these characters who give really great opinions and who really speak their own side of things in a clear and compelling way.
Right. And like you said earlier, even though they are kind of presented as the most antagonistic kind of figures in the film, they are not really that two-dimensional. They're still providing these rational explanations for things that make sense from the perspective of these characters. They're not just mustache twirling people who want to take this girl down for no reason.
Right. And even from our perspective as well, like like I said, even though they show that some of these things really did happen, quote unquote, in the film, we still they still explain their case. So they're very articulate in the way that they describe how they're feeling and what their experience is, that we sort of start to believe them as well. It's definitely a fair weighing of both sides of the aisle, I think.
And we are, like you said, also seeing the vision of the Immaculate Conception. But it is through the eyes of Bernadette, and we don't see anyone else having these visions, and the film has established that there are scientific explanations for some of the miracles that are happening here. So it's almost like what we see in something like Life of Pi, where there are two versions of the same story almost, and maybe this is the better version of this story.
Absolutely. And I think it would be very interesting to see this film without showing the Virgin Mary at all.
Yeah.
It would be a lot more fascinating if it was really left up in the air.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I mean, you have to look at this film through the lens of where 20th century, religion and film was covered at this time. I mean, I think of a movie that just came out 2 years before this in 1941 called Come Live With Me, where they lay their religion on very thick. And you could hardly watch a film in this era without them, like the very long scene where they're saying grace or just other religious, attributes and paraphernalia throughout. But I mean, of course, this one is a lot more so than others. But it was very much a part of the culture of the time.
Yeah, yeah. And now that I'm thinking about it, I do maybe think if they had never even shown the Virgin Mary, or however you want to call her, I wonder how that would have played. It's almost like in a horror movie, not to compare it to that, but when you're not seeing the monster, what you can envision in your mind is so much more powerful than what you see on screen.
Absolutely. And not only that, I mean, there would have been a lot more skepticism from the audience. And I don't think they would have done that in 1943 because that's not what they wanted.
Right.
They wanted to, make people believe and make people, use their faith to go in that direction rather than to side with Vincent Price and Lee J. Cobb's characters. But I think if this movie were made today, I don't think they would show the Virgin Mary. And I think that would be a really wise decision.
Yeah, definitely.
But it's interesting to think about.
Yeah. A few interesting dynamics with some of the other cast members. We can talk about those who were nominated. There's Charles Bickford, who's playing Dominique Paramale, who is a member of the church who is skeptical at first, but eventually comes to sort of believe in Bernadette and what she's experiencing. He has a very interesting arc. I don't necessarily know if he's nomination worthy, but regardless, interesting performance and a compelling presence.
I would agree with that. I don't think he quite deserved a nomination, but he definitely makes an impact on this film. I don't know if you want to discuss the other nominees.
Well,
for my money, for my money, you can't beat Claude Rains, but
we'll certainly get to that.
Yeah, I think the women of this film stand out a lot more.
Yeah, so Gladys Cooper and Revere, both nominated. We got double supporting actresses here. And I think Gladys Cooper is actually really good here in her very limited amount of screen time as Bernadette's teacher at the beginning, who comes back and later is the mistress at the convent. And she's very strict with her, and it's eventually revealed that she is actually kind of jealous of Bernadette for seeing these visions because she feels that she has devoted herself to God for so long and hasn't really been rewarded for it that much, and she goes through some really interesting internal conflict about it and realizes that she's just been hanging on to this resentment that is very, very unchristian-like.
For sure. I think Gladys Cooper, to me, played the same character in all of her works.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you see her in like Rebecca, The Twilight Zone. She really plays the same type of role over and over again. But in my opinion, I think this is without a doubt the best example of that characterization that I've seen of her. I think especially in like the final act where she, as you say, she kind of makes that realization that she has that jealousy within her, that she felt that she was more worthy to see the Virgin Mary, and the guilt that she feels when she finds out about Bernadette's the suffering that she's going through. I think that's so compelling and so fascinating to watch. I think that's actually probably one of my favorite scenes where she's in she's in the church and she kneels and her eyes, they tell the whole story.
Mm-hmm. Totally. Well, speaking a little bit of people who play the same thing over and over, we have Anne Revere here. We've talked about her already with National Velvet and Gentleman's Agreement. She's basically nominated 3 times for what is essentially the exact same role in many ways, just as kind of this very sturdy and dignified mother who doesn't really raise her voice but is just very firm and headstrong. And she's
definitely a matriarch. Yeah. That's for sure. I think, yeah, I would definitely agree. It's another one of those cases where she's sort of playing the same character over and over again. But yeah, in this case, I think I would say she's deserving as well. Mm-hmm. You know, I think she really makes her presence known in all of her scenes. Oh, yeah. Like, especially towards the beginning, mm-hmm. Where there's sort of the conflict of whether she should believe Bernadette or not. Yeah. And how she sort of comes around. And it's really interesting to see where her character comes from as well. Mm-hmm. And it actually, I think there's a pretty good comparison to a film that I'll probably mention a little more later on that was made the same year called Lassie Come Home. Mm. It makes me think a little bit of Elsa Lanchester's role in that as the mother, mm-hmm. because you see, as you mentioned before, you know, you see like the whole time capsule of 1943. It shows these 2 mothers in the same year in similar films falling on really hard times and how they have to sort of thicken their skin to get through it, which I think is a really interesting concept because a lot of other matriarchs of that time with World War II going on had to do the same.
Right. That's a good point. And it does sound a little dismissive when I just say that she's playing the same kind of role, but she does play this exact type of character so well. You know, she's perfectly cast for this.
She is really a perfect foil for the glitz and glamour of 1940s leading ladies.
Yeah. Like, she feels very much like that New York actress, you know?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. She is someone that you could easily pass on the street, whereas at the same time, you've got like a Betty Grable situation going on with 20th Century. And if you put the 2 side by side, you're like, how are these both movie stars? Yeah. It's true. Really unbelievable. Yeah. But I feel like Anne Revere, she's definitely more realistic. And I think she would easily work in modern cinema as well.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. She represents so many people, I think. So many mothers.
She's the every woman to Henry Fonda's every man.
There you go. Yeah. I mean, if I had a ballot, I think I would definitely nominate Jennifer Jones for sure. Gladys Cooper, probably. Yeah. I mean, it depends on the competition, but I think she stands out. Maybe Anne Revere. I'm sort of on the fence on that. Probably not Charles Bickford, but I would definitely put in Vincent Price, who I think is very strong.
Oh, especially his final scene. I would definitely nominate Vincent Price over Charles Bickford. Yeah. I would honestly maybe, again, depending on the competition, as you say, might even go as far as to say Lee J. Cobb a little bit. Sure. He doesn't share quite as many scenes as Vincent Price, but I think I'm probably just biased in saying that because I love Lee J. Cobb in anything,
Me
and
too.
I was really surprised to see him in this. He's like one of the greatest actors. He's so natural
Yeah.
and so fascinating to watch. He can convince you of anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Speaking of very compelling screen presence, just, yeah. Anytime he
Yeah,
shows up in anything, you're just like, oh.
he's definitely more reserved in this. He's not, of course, as like explosive of a personality as he is in like 12 Angry Men,
Yeah.
but he's still so believable.
Mm-hmm. Totally. And speaking to the end of the film, I'm curious for your thoughts on this. The film spends a lot of time in Lourdes in her hometown, but then the last 30 minutes or so have her going to a convent, and she doesn't feel great about that because she just wants to kind of live peacefully in her own little community, but she also feels this sense of duty, and so she goes off. And I'm curious whether you like this final act here, because it feels a little separate from the first 2 hours.
It definitely is, and I think Charles Bickford's character really spells it out the best. It's pretty obvious that this is kind of where Bernadette's life has to lead because she basically has, through no fault of her own, of course, but she has made herself into a religious figure.
Yeah.
So if she doesn't pursue a life of religion, then that will seem strange. It will seem like, obviously, according to, what has happened to her and according to herself, even, this is what she was put on earth to do.
Mm-hmm.
To pursue a life of religion. So if she didn't do that, if she became a housemaid instead, as she had wanted to do, then I don't think that it would have been as satisfying,
Right.
or as meaningful, or it just seems like this is her path. So I wasn't too upset about it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, of course, it's always strange when they just separate her from everyone she knows and loves, like in the very last few minutes
Yeah.
of this very long film. And then, of course, the progression of her health and everything. But yeah, I personally didn't have a problem with that.
Yeah.
What about you?
Just watching it, I felt like this feels like sort of an extended epilogue of just what she would do next after she leaves town. But then I was just thinking about it, and I'm like, I almost wanted more of that, just because, I mean, just on a pure watchability level, it does help break things up, and some of those moments in the convent, I think, are the most memorable and affecting, and I think it would have been compelling to have maybe just have it like the first half be about her experiences in her town and all the doubters, and then the entire second half be her in the convent and in this new place and how she navigates this world, because I do think it can feel a little rushed, where I really did want to spend even more time there, I think.
I think that's a really interesting perspective. I think now that you mentioned that, I think my issue with that act of the film is I would have liked to see her accomplish more.
Yeah.
Like, you basically see her scrubbing floors and then, spoiler alert, she starts dying.
Mm-hmm.
There's really no accomplishment for her. Like, you don't get to see her become a nun. You don't get to see her help others in any religious way. I think that would have been something that really would have really been satisfying to watch,
Yeah.
since she's, built herself up in this religious sphere. And I think it would have been, like I said, really satisfying to see her arc, complete itself. Like, basically, it makes it seem like her whole effort in leaving everyone she loves and scrubbing these floors and doing all these menial tasks, it makes it seem like it's for nothing.
Mm-hmm. By the end, yeah, especially once you're not exactly seeing any of the miracles that are happening at all.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah, but it also just makes it feel like she has always just been this humble small town girl who didn't want to be this saintly figure, even if that's what she ended up being. And it does just make it feel like she's the same as she always was, which is interesting just from a human perspective, but doesn't always make for the most exciting arc.
Yeah, that could be interpreted as good or bad, because on one hand, she stayed true to herself throughout the entire film, which is really commendable. But at the same time, you don't really get to see a whole lot of development.
Yeah.
Which is not what you want to see in a 3-hour film.
Right. Yeah. Just in terms of any technical elements, you mentioned the cinematography earlier. Definitely very compelling, especially in those moments where you're just zeroing in on her face, and just the bright light on her is very memorable work there.
It's very much star lighting.
Yes.
I think she's still made to look fairly beautiful.
Yes.
I feel like that's a very deliberate choice. That's the kind of the studio system for you, in my opinion. Like everybody else just looks pretty realistic and pretty normal, but she's got the holy light.
She's got a glow. Yeah.
She's got the soft focus.
Yep.
And then another thing that really stood out to me was that George Seaton wrote the screenplay. Mm-hmm. And of course, he's best known to me as the director writer of Miracle on 34th Street and The Country Girl.
Yep.
And that really stood out to me. I was quite surprised, because you don't really see a whole lot of director writers.
This is true.
Especially the fact that he really didn't dive into this kind of subject matter all the time.
Yeah, I'm just looking up where he was at this point in his career.
Yeah, but that's what makes it so interesting, because this is pre Miracle on 34th Street and pre The Country Girl. So this is like probably, I mean, I don't have it in front of me, but this is probably one of the first really big films that he was involved in, I would think.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, this was around the time where he was rising. Yeah, early 40s. Yep.
And
so
meanwhile,
really
Henry
put him
King
on the map in many ways, but yeah.
Yeah, and then meanwhile, Henry King, he's like a veteran at this point almost, because he's directed so many, like I said, of Tyrone Power's films. He really stands out there for me. Mm-hmm. He was sort of one of 20th century's favorite directors to work with, I would think, because he was just such a professional.
Yeah.
Pretty cut and dry, though, as a director, I would think.
Very much so. Yes.
He didn't take a whole lot of artistic liberties, but I think that's okay in this case, because you're really just sort of telling a story, and a lot of the creative aspects of this film come from the cinematography and the score, and a lot of the really whimsical actors that you have here. So as far as directing, it can be cut and dry.
Right. Well, we just talked about Wilson on this show, the movie he made right after this.
Oh my
goodness.
Which is
quite similar in that regard, but worse.
That's so funny, because we discussed that film, I believe, in our Black Swan episode on Ticklish Business. And I think we discussed it in the lens of the Oscars, like how Wilson won, I believe, for... Oh, no, we discussed it in our Oscar snubs episode, because Wilson won over Meet Me in St. Louis, I think, for color cinematography.
Yep. It won 5 Oscars.
Oh, my goodness. And everybody remembers Wilson, right?
Yeah, I feel like I'm the first podcast that's talked about Wilson at all in terms of a focus. But anyway, Song of Bernadette. I think on the whole, I would definitely recommend the film, even if there are some issues just with the length of it all and some of the focus issues. Like I said, I wish there was more to do with just Bernadette and what she is experiencing and her arc. But on the whole, I think I was expecting something a little more propaganda-ish in terms of religion than what this ended up being.
I would definitely agree with that. I would say I would recommend this film, but if I were trying to sell it to someone, I would sell it through a lot of these supporting actors.
Yeah.
And I would sell it through, again, I was actually quite surprised how how much they don't shove religion in your face. It's definitely religious, but you get to see both sides in a very eloquent way. And the acting performances for the most part are really good. I wasn't a fan of the father, but he just sticks out like a sore thumb. He has like the most American accent when they're supposed to be in France.
Well, that's actually a good point. The accents are a little all over the place here.
Yeah, absolutely. Like for some reason, like some of them are worse than others.
Yeah.
I think Jennifer Jones even puts on like a little bit of an accent. She's trying her hardest, but yeah, that's again, the studio system for you. They'll throw all the actors into one big melting pot of a film, which is what this is to me.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you don't mind the topic of religion being the forefront of a film of this era, and if you don't mind sitting through the runtime, I think that it's worth the time that you would put into watching it. I would recommend it.
Yeah. Well, when we come back, we will be discussing why the Song of Bernadette lost Best Picture to a little movie called Casablanca.
So magnificently did Jennifer Jones interpret the part of Bernadette, the peasant girl in Franz Werfel's The Song of Bernadette, that from the moment this great motion picture was first publicly presented, there was no doubt that it had given the world a new, incomparable star. By special arrangement, this theater is permitted to show you briefly something of the magnitude, the beauty, the sweep and power of this distinguished and great production. Neither from this screen nor from the screen of any other theater have you seen an entertainment destined to linger so vividly in your memory as an unforgettable experience.
And we're back. So now we'll be discussing why the Song of Bernadette lost Best Picture to Casablanca. The Song of Bernadette was nominated for 12 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, Best Director for Henry King, Best Actress for Jennifer Jones, Best Supporting Actor for Charles Bickford, Best Supporting Actors for Gladys Cooper and Anne Revere, Best Screenplay, Best Art Direction, Black and White, Best Cinematography, Black and White, Best Film Editing, Best Scoring of a Dramatic or Comedy Picture, and Best Sound Recording. So pretty much maxed out. And it won for Best Actress, it won Best Art Direction, it won Cinematography, and it won Best Score. So did very well. And before the Oscars, the Song of Bernadette won the first ever Golden Globe for Best Picture. So that's some interesting trivia for you if you ever need to say what the first Golden Globe Best Picture winner was. And it also won the director and Best Actress there, so did very well. Meanwhile, we had Casablanca, which won the National Board of Review for Best Director, and that's about it, which is really interesting because if you look at this in the lens of the horse race and the precursors, Casablanca was not the front runner. Believe it or not. And
that just blows my mind.
Yeah.
Not only what Song of Bernadette was nominated for and won, but what Casablanca was not nominated for and didn't win.
It did not win any other of the Best Picture prizes leading up to the Oscars. It didn't win the New York Film Critics. It didn't win National Board of Review. It didn't win the Golden Globe. So for all intents and purposes, it was like, yes, the Oscars love Casablanca, but not necessarily the front runner that we might expect it to be looking back, which is fascinating. But why do you think Casablanca ends up emerging over all of these other 9 films to be the Best Picture winner? And also, why do you think The Song of Bernadette did not get there?
I think it's actually really interesting to look at Casablanca through the lens of the Academy Awards, because technically, in my opinion, it should not have been on the ballot for 1943 because it had its exactly. It had its world premiere in November of 1942, but it was only released nationally in the US January of 1943. So I think it's really interesting to compare and contrast. Like, what if Casablanca was nominated for 1942, as it probably should have been? Really, to me, Casablanca won because of the year. Like, if it had been nominated in 1942, I think it would have had a bit more competition.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's also like hugely a matter of personal preference. I think it's indisputable the insane cultural impact that Casablanca has made through the years. But yeah, I have to say it's pretty obvious. I mean, you've got just the fascinating love story. You have the historical relevance, because it was really being made while the war was still going on and while people were still unable to get home, you know?
Yeah.
And it really struck a chord with people. I mean, you've got a perfect cast of characters. It's really shocking considering that they decided to nominate it as part of 1943, that it didn't get more of those acting nominations, and it didn't pull in all the nominations that this film did, Song of Bernadette. To tell you why Song of Bernadette didn't win, I think for me, it's one of those films, and I feel like this happens a lot at the Oscars. You've got a film that's its technical achievements are probably better than they probably surpass its impact on culture at the time. Like, I think, you mentioned the 4 that it did win for. You've got Best Actress, Best Score, Best Black and White Cinematography, and then Best Art Direction, Black and White. I think that's exactly what I would give it.
Yeah, sounds about right.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Like, I mean, it really made a star out of Jennifer Jones. I think her performance is extremely compelling. I think we mentioned the score, how much it really defines the film. The art direction is beautiful. The cinematography is beautiful for a black and white film. But I don't think it's Best Picture worthy. I think Casablanca absolutely is. Mm-hmm. So I feel like in that sense, it kind of speaks for itself.
Yeah. Well, I think the Song of Bernadette is sort of a at this time would maybe even be considered a bit of the old-fashioned kind of a Best Picture winner.
Oscar baity.
Yes.
It is a little Oscar baity.
Right. And when you look at Casablanca, it's almost a newer school kind of a film when you consider just all of the formal elements to it and just how economical it is, and also that it has this archness to it sometimes that is different from those very earnest and pure kind of films like The Song of Bernadette, that it has this humor to it, and there's this fascinating direction of just the chaos of Rick's bar. I find it very interesting on that level. I mean, what is there to really add about Casablanca at this point? I just
definitely it is for itself.
It is what it is. I would love to just speak about it a little bit now while we're here. I just love the fact that the people involved with Casablanca didn't really get the sense that they were making what would become one of the most beloved movies of all time. They thought it was just another Warner Brothers film. Certainly one of the better ones, but they weren't really feeling like they were truly making something special. Like, even Humphrey Bogart and Ingrid Bergman were uneasy about just the material and what they were doing there. And that's always been fascinating to me.
Absolutely. And I think it's really awesome that you mentioned that it is kind of new school filmmaking. There are so many things that this film did that were so modern for the time and so unlike anything else. I think I have a lot of respect for really the courage that American filmmakers had during this point to tell these stories of people suffering and what they were going through while the war was still going on.
Yeah.
I mean, this this movie, for, not to sound too crude, but it pissed off a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
As The Great Dictator did, as, to throw in another Patricia Morrison film, Hitler's Madman. So this movie, Casablanca, I think it's brilliant in that sense. And then similarly to Song of Bernadette, you've got such a fascinating cast of characters.
Oh, yeah.
Every single performance is memorable. Every single person is there for a reason. There's no unnecessary dead weight in the acting department in Casablanca.
Yeah. And I don't know about you, but when I watch this film, I just get so wrapped up in it and so emotional, and not just with what it's delivering on a story level, but just people working at the top of their game and just creating this film that is complex in the message it's trying to deliver, but also so universal in just how economical it is. The use of light and shadow that just highlights the stars' faces so beautifully. Speaking of that, the melancholy of as time goes by. I mean,
I'm a sucker for a romantic film, number one. That's my favorite genre.
Sure. Yep.
And then I have such a huge, deep, deep love for Humphrey Bogart, compared to a lot of the other tough guy actors of his day, because he had that ability to really open himself up emotionally towards his leading ladies. And you totally see that in Casablanca. Mm-hmm. I think everybody debates the ending. Everyone's like, oh, would this ending have been better? Would this ending have been better? I think it ends perfectly.
Yeah. And that is also a very new school kind of an ending too.
Right. Because, there are so many, you hear so many quotes from this era of film, from directors, from producers. You got to have a happy ending. The Hollywood studio system, happy ending. This film definitely ends on a high note with that classic final line, this is the start of a beautiful friendship. But you see that the protagonist has basically screwed himself over. Yeah. He's shot himself in the foot. But yeah, what can't you say about Casablanca? It's just so, it's a perfect film. It really is. I'm so biased because I love everyone in it. And then emotionally, it really does pull at your heartstrings, not only the romantic scenes, but also I have a very vivid memory of watching this at the Humphrey Bogart Film Festival in Florida a few years ago. Yeah, Eddie Muller introduced it. It was pretty amazing. But awesome. The scene, seeing it on the big screen, the scene, Les Marseilles, you can't help but totally tear up.
Yeah.
And it just had such an impact, like I said, at that time where, literally some of the extras in that film were refugees from the war while the war was still going on. Mm-hmm. They were singing that song from their hearts. It just gets me every time.
Yeah. Vive la France.
Exactly. Yes. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can't argue Casablanca winning. I think if Casablanca didn't win this year or any other year, whether it was nominated in 42 or 43, I think a lot more people would not take the Oscars seriously.
Right.
More than people already don't.
This is very true. Yeah, this would have been one of the most unjust robberies in history.
Right.
Yeah.
They couldn't have decided any other way.
Yeah. And I just love all the little relationships that form here. And this is, the Song of Bernadette is 155 minutes. Casablanca is an hour 40, maybe. Mm-hmm. And just establishes so many great relationships. Obviously the romance between Rick and Ilsa, but also just that relationship between Rick and Louis.
Absolutely.
Who I do ship, by the way.
Oh, for sure. I think I would, while we're throwing that out, mm-hmm. No doubt in my mind I would have given Claude Rains the Oscar for this.
Yeah.
No doubt. He really deserved it. It was such a, I would go as far as to say that it's one of the standout supporting actor performances of the golden era.
Easily. Yeah.
And I think Claude Rains was such a dynamic actor. He's one of those actors to me. If he was in a film that year, give him an Oscar. Because you've got like this, Four Daughters, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, The Invisible Man. You could just throw out movies all day long.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. You could throw out movies all day long that he gave perfect performances in, and this is definitely one of them.
And he never won. He never won an Oscar.
I didn't know that, and that makes me want to cry.
I know, that's deeply upsetting. He was nominated for 4 Oscars: Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, Casablanca, Mr. Skeffington, and Notorious, and they couldn't find it in their heart to award him any of those times.
And then on that note, you can always make the argument that Humphrey Bogart should have won an Oscar for anything other than The African Queen.
Yes, and I will make that argument.
Yeah, I mean, He was nominated for this. It's actually, like, fascinating. I think they actually did pretty well on the Best Actor ballot for 1943. I would say they nominated all the right people. It would be really interesting if Mickey Rooney had won an Oscar this year.
That would have been an interesting alternate reality.
I'm trying to wrap my brain around that. He was so young. I think he was like 21.
Yep. Super young. Yep. Man. But anyway, yes, I'm not too surprised, obviously, looking back, just because of what Casablanca is, but I also read from the book Inside Oscar about some interesting Monday morning quarterbacking, if you will, about why Bernadette ended up losing, because it was considered a frontrunner. And there's this quote here from Daily Variety that says, Fox, its prestige campaign for Bernadette blew up in its face. At Oscar time, Bernadette was still in limited release at advanced ticket prices, which meant that those with the bulk of the voting power, the extras, had not yet been able to afford to go to the movie. A poll of voting extras showed that only 25% had seen Bernadette, whereas nearly all of them had seen and voted for Casablanca.
Wow, that's actually really fascinating. I mean, in this day and age, that would never happen.
Yeah, but very, very interesting, because Bernadette would not actually go into super wide release until 1945, 2 years later.
Wow,
which is an interesting
that's so
strategy.
Crazy to wrap my head around.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, like, you think about the impact that 20th Century Fox had on cinema as a whole, and how this definitely has its part in that. And then it just makes me think about, like, how to bring up, like, a really depressing subject, you know, how there's the possibility that 20th Century Fox's work is pretty much going to be, like, shut away in a vault.
Mm-hmm.
It just makes me think of, look at all the opportunities they're missing out on. Maybe it would have won Best Picture if you don't shut films away.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so I just found that to be super fascinating, and who knows what would have changed if the Song of Bernadette had been more widely available to voting members. So. Absolutely.
And then it just makes you think about how many other decisions happen one way or the other that way, because, like, Oscar campaigns have a lot to do with who eventually wins.
Oh, yes. Believe me, I know that by now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that feels like a relatively cut and dry case, but it is interesting just looking back at how Casablanca, you might look at that Best Picture lineup and be like, oh, of course Casablanca is the winner and it was always going to be the winner, but maybe not really.
I mean, you also have the case of, like, Citizen Kane not winning.
Well, yes.
So there's always the possibility that they could have chosen that way, but I think in retrospect, we're all very glad that they decided to award Casablanca with Best Picture. Yeah. I wouldn't imagine it any other way.
Glad it worked out this way. So let's get to a few questions. This is from Catherine Short, who said, Jennifer Jones is a revelation in The Song of Bernadette, but her career has often been overshadowed by her personal life. Could you discuss how her relationship with David O. Selznick impacted her career and how she developed over time as a dramatic actress?
Oh my goodness. Okay, I'm gonna get some flack for this. I do think that Jennifer Jones was a bit of an opportunist.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't want to throw too much shade in her direction because she was really brilliant. I mean, my personal favorite Jennifer Jones film was actually Love Letters. But I'm still in the process of discovering her work as a whole. The more films I watch, the more I realize she was very glamorous. She was very beautiful, but she had that natural quality to her as an actress that balanced it out, almost like an Ingrid Bergman.
Yeah.
In a sense, she had a very natural beauty and a natural acting style. But yeah, I mean, her whole story, her whole like claim to fame is pretty notorious. She was the childhood sweetheart of another very fascinating but troubled actor, Robert Walker. They were together before they were famous, and then they were married. Well, I'm gonna look this up so I don't this whole history. Yeah, they were married in 1939, and then of course she began her career in 1940. And then eventually, she was cast in this film, and then this is while she was in a relationship with David O. Selznick, even though she ultimately wouldn't divorce Robert Walker until 1945.
Yeah.
But there's always the debate, did she choose fame and success over love? Because obviously, David O. Selznick gave her a lot more opportunities, not least of which this film, which gave her an Oscar. So it makes you wonder, right? Like whether she would have, or whether she... It makes you wonder whether she chose David O. Selznick over Robert Walker for the right reasons.
Mm-hmm.
I'm in the category maybe not, but it's just really tragic, I think, most of all for Robert Walker, because it essentially destroyed him.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And eventually his career, and it makes you wonder how he would have fared in Hollywood, because he gave some really brilliant performances, of course, in Strangers on a Train, not least of which.
Yes.
But also definitely more films than that. I mean, you've got The Clock, you've got Her Highness and the Bellboy, which is really cute. One of my favorite Ava Gardner film, actually, One Touch of Venus. But yeah, that's one of the most infamous love triangles, I would say, in Hollywood at the time, and it really ties into the Oscars because Jennifer Jones, if she hadn't gotten with David O. Selznick, maybe she wouldn't have landed this role and wouldn't have gotten the Oscar for this.
Yeah, I would say maybe it's a little bit of both. I wouldn't say she was just totally money hungry and just wanted to advance her career, but I do think she was smart. She was strategic. Let's just
absolutely
say that.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah. And as far as how she developed over time as a dramatic actress,
the only film I have seen her in from later on in her career would be The Indiscretion of an American Wife.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought she was pretty brilliant in that. I mean, she is great in everything I've seen her in. And I think that it's just really fascinating to look at her life and to look at her career, because to a certain extent, I would think it was worth it, all of the choices that she made, because she really paved a fascinating... Oh, I did also see The Towering Inferno. Sorry.
Well, there's that.
Yeah, there you go. But she really did pave a fascinating and unique career for herself, because you've got like Clooney Brown, Portrait of Jenny, all of these films that...
Duel in the Sun.
Yeah, absolutely. Love is a Many Splendored Thing.
Yeah. She dipped into some interesting racial territory in that time too.
Yeah, it's just really fascinating because She only has 26 credits, but so many of them are memorable because of her and singular to her and her career.
Yeah.
Like, you don't think of, in my opinion, you don't think of Clooney Brown or Duel in the Sun or Madame Bovary without thinking of Jennifer Jones. She commands the screen in really everything that she's in.
Yeah.
Definitely The Song of Bernadette would be one of, if not the best example of that.
Yeah. What a fascinating starting point for her. Yeah.
I couldn't have chosen a better debut. Like, I think there
yeah.
there are a few debuts that are so
instantly, yeah.
Absolutely, like, instantly captivating. She's, lit in the perfect way. She's given all of the best angles, so many amazing lines, so much screen time. The entire focus of the film is on her. You couldn't ask for a better introduction than that.
Yeah. So I think that satisfied that question very well.
Hopefully.
Yeah, for sure. A few questions about Casablanca. One from Ronaldo Sosa. Had Bogey won this year, do you think he wins again in 1951, or would Marlon Brando or Montgomery Clift have won instead? I can answer this. Brando would have won.
I am so Wait, which Brando movie was that for?
Streetcar Named Desire.
Oh. Yeah, I would have to agree with that. But at the same time, I'm biased because I adore Montgomery Clift, and I would have wanted him to win.
Well, then you are very welcome on this podcast, because I do too. I love that man so much.
If I could give an Academy Award to any actor who didn't get one, I would give one to Montgomery Clift, and then for actress, I would say Natalie Wood. But
yeah.
But yeah, that was such a tough year.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I reiterate the fact that Bogey should have won for anything else.
Yeah. He
could have won for that. He could have won for Casablanca. He could have won for Treasure of the Sierra Madre. He could have won
that's
for
the one, I think.
I mean, see, I wouldn't even say that, because again, I'm biased because I really love Bogey and I love all of his films. I'm pretty close to completing his filmography, I would say. But I would, if I could give Bogey one Oscar and one Oscar only, I would actually possibly give it to him for The Cane Mutiny.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. Yeah.
I think he was just brilliant in that. But The African Queen would be pretty close to the bottom of my list.
Yeah. Choices were made.
Yeah. For sure.
Yeah. This is what happens sometimes when you don't reward someone when you should have in their prime. So anyway, let's get to this one. Joey Ailman said, you already answered this. Would you give Claude Rains the win here? I think it's his best nom and the best of the 5.
Easily.
Yeah.
Easily. I don't think I would go as far not to shun any other performances. I would go as far as to say I think it's the only one that's really worth even being nominated. I mean, Charles Coburn is great. I love The More the Merrier. I think he's really endearing in that film. But I like to think of and my co-host on Ticklish Business, Drea, is very similar in that sense. We both think of how did this performance or this film impact cinema as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at it through that lens, Claude Rains, no doubt.
Yeah, I would give Claude Rains the win here, even though Coburn is really, really good at The More the Merrier, I will just say. Having just recently watched it, he's such a great standout comedic performance. But Claude Rains, you got to do it for Casablanca.
Absolutely. Charles Coburn is one of those actors. It's like, should have won an Oscar, maybe, but whether you would actually give him one, is a different story.
Yeah, it's not one of those undeniable ones like Claude Rains.
Like Claude Rains, exactly.
There you go.
Exactly.
Joey Ailman just asked one more question. Casablanca is considered to be one of, if not the greatest screenplays ever. Do you agree with this? And if not, then which do you think it is? And he says, personally, I think it's Network.
Ooh, that's interesting. Hmm. I think one of the screenplays that always pops out in my mind is Cat on a Hot Tin Roof.
Ooh.
I would also say maybe 12 Angry Men, just because I wish I had written it myself.
Fair.
Or I mean, Billy Wilder is my favorite director, so like all of his, but The Apartment especially.
Ooh, that's good.
Just to throw a few out there. But yeah, I mean, Golden Age, Casablanca is pretty brilliant. Like one of my favorite, it's just so quotable. Number one.
Yeah, and it still
my,
endures. Yeah.
Yeah, one of my favorite lines that I think is really underrated because it's never like one of the lines that's like quoted. But on the romance aspect of it, like they wore gray, you wore blue. I love that part, the whole that leads into the whole flashback, and I love his delivery of that line. But it is so quotable, and it's so memorable, and it's just wrapped up perfectly. And again, the ending, you couldn't change the ending for the world, in my opinion.
Right. There's just so many that I feel like I just want to make a 10-way tie for like the best of all time. But
for sure.
All About Eve, I mean, Sunset Boulevard,
Brilliant.
Some Like It Hot.
Oh, Some Like It Hot is so good. I mean, yeah. I'm again like huge Billy Wilder fan, so like that speaks to my heart.
Yeah. Chinatown. I mean, there's Citizen Kane. I mean, how can you even say that any of them are better than the other?
And that's a perfect point. Like the Oscars are so subjective. It's really every year it's comparing apples to oranges.
Yep. Which is what we do on this very show. So exactly. How am I any better? But let's get to these other Best Picture nominees. You mentioned earlier that you hadn't seen every single one of them, which is fine, which is totally fine and not a requirement. But we can definitely talk about the ones you've seen. We already talked a little bit about The More the Merrier, so we could just go to that one. Really fun screwball comedy directed by George Stevens. And it's about the housing shortage in Washington, D.C., which doesn't sound like it would be a comedy, but it very much is.
It's funny. I think the reason why this was nominated is because this was a year with 10 nominees. I think if it were only 5, it would not be on the ballot because comedy never gets its due.
This is true.
With the Academy. And I think that it's really amazing that this was nominated and that it got at least that little nod, that little wink. Mm-hmm. And the fact that Charles Coburn won for it, I think is really fascinating. But yeah, Joel McCrea, I just adore him in anything. He's like the standout for me, but everybody, of course, talks about Jean Arthur and talks about Charles Coburn the most.
Yeah, both nominated. Joel McCrea was not, but...
Yeah, was Joel McCrea nominated for anything though? Like,
I don't know.
He deserved to be, but maybe he didn't. He was just very cute to watch. But
but Jean Arthur is so funny and bold and just willing to go there comedically in every single scene.
Yeah, she really gives her whole self, and that's almost a requirement in comedy. And I think that's why this movie does so well. And to go back again to what you were saying about this list being such a great time capsule, I mean, it talks about a very specific period in history.
Mm-hmm. Very specific issue. Yep.
Exactly. Like this, it seems like a movie that isn't as easy to relate to today, but so many of my classic film fan friends cite this as a favorite and say that it's a movie they always go back to. I would say in the last few years specifically, it's gotten a little bit of a resurgence, which I love.
Yeah. And it's, for those who don't know, it's about this older retired millionaire played by Charles Coburn, and he goes to this woman's apartment because she's wanting a new roommate, Jean Arthur, and Charles Coburn is then subletting half of his sublet, and hijinks ensue, and Joel McCrea gets involved. There's a romance. They share a few pretty racy kisses, which is interesting for 1943.
And what movie is Joel McCrea not sharing racy kisses? Because you've got
fair.
you've got this, you've got it's on the tip of my tongue. The one with Claudette Colbert. Hold on. Dang it. Wait, I just saw the Palm Beach Story. Yeah, that kiss is talked about a lot.
Mm.
He was just a very physically romantic actor.
Yes,
he was all over his leading lady and everything. But yeah, really, really cute, really unique film.
Yeah. And do things get a little contrived by the end? Perhaps. But this is a very fun film, and I think it weirdly does hold up compared to a lot of films from this Best Picture race, just in terms of pure entertainment value. And I love that it's here.
Oh, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, me too. It's a pleasant surprise to see it on the list, and I'm really happy about that.
Yeah. And I would almost argue that it might make a top 5 just because it gets directing nomination, it gets screenplay nomination, it gets 2 acting nominations, a supporting actor win. I don't know what else.
That's true. I think it's one of those rare ones where it deals with a serious issue in a lighthearted way.
Mm-hmm.
So I think for those reasons,
maybe.
Whether it again, the Oscars, they're very fickle about comedies.
Yeah.
But I think it's worthy of an exception.
I think so. Yeah. How about the human comedy?
Again, we have a movie that it's the perfect encapsulation of its time.
Oh, yes.
And
perhaps
for
more
me,
than any other film this Best Picture lineup.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so it's a really brilliant film. It's really relatable. It's been a while since I've seen that one, but for me, I can never take my eyes off of Marsha Hunt.
Mm.
And again, it goes to saying I have that huge connection with actresses and actors who are still with us. And this is such a great example of her work. And then Mickey Rooney is so talented. A lot of classic film fans that I know are not on the Mickey Rooney train.
Mm.
I wasn't when I first became a classic film fan, but throughout my discovery of his work, he has earned my respect.
Yeah. Mickey Rooney, I can take or leave. I'll just say that.
That's fair. That's fair. I would say most people are in that boat.
He's good in this kind of a role, for sure. And I think the final few scenes are where he's really displaying some interesting dramatic work that I find compelling. This movie is not really on my wavelength, to be perfectly honest. Even if I can totally understand why it resonated in 1943, it's very, very earnest. And it's directed by our old pal Clarence Brown, director of The Yearling and National Velvet. And it's all about a young man, Mickey Rooney, who is helping out back home while a lot of his peers, including his older brother, they're away at war and during World War II. And he's working in this business of telegrams, and he's often delivering bad news to some of the other folks in his small town. Very sentimental and propaganda-ish. Everyone's doing their part. Very Norman Rockwell Americana, small town life, cute kids, little romances. I can see why this can appeal to people. It's just not really for me.
I totally get that. That's kind of how I felt about Song of Bernadette a little bit. It's it's nice. It's
sure,
pretty. I think there are a lot of technical things to appreciate about it.
It's very well made, for sure.
Very well made.
Yeah.
Not for me.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's interesting that we could draw the parallel there, the comparison there.
Yeah. I do love, I wrote this down even, that the critic Bosley Crowther said that there were charming moments to the film, but there were also some moments that were, quote, maudlin gobs of cinematic goo.
Oh my goodness.
Which is wonderful sentence. But I'm sort of in agreement there. I think it's fine for what it is. It's just not really for me.
Do you think it would have earned its spot in a top 5 of the year?
Oh boy. Well, it's nominated for director, which I often go to as likely. It certainly is one of those films that is very of the moment, and speaking to direct concerns that people were having, I would say it's on the bubble, like 5 or 6. Like, it could go either way.
I get that. I think that's fair.
Yeah, because it is a little, I don't know if I want to say slight, but compared to some of the other films, it's maybe not. We'll get to that. Maybe we'll have that discussion at the end about what would make it in a field of 5.
For sure. It's an interesting thing to think about.
Mm-hmm. And the other Best Director nominee, actually, that's also nominated for picture, is Heaven Can Wait. Not to be confused with the Warren Beatty one, of course.
I really love this film.
Mm.
I think, here we go with the color cinematography. Let me look this up real quick so I don't sound like an idiot. I want to say this is Leon Shamroy, who is my favorite cinematographer.
This is Edward Kronjaeger.
Oh, nope. Okay,
So,
never mind.
Yeah.
Leon Shamroy-esque.
There you go.
But yeah, I really love this one. I think it's so, I said unique for the more the merrier, but this one really is unique. It is told through the frame of like, talks about the devil, talks about this man's life beginning to end. I think it's so fascinating. I love the earlier 40s color films, and I love Adamich is so underrated, and Jean Tierney is really cute in this.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say it's her best by any means, but it's a really fascinating plot.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting to watch. It's a personal favorite among the 10 nominees for me, but I don't think it would have made the top 5.
I don't think so either. In this case, I don't think this would make the top 5. But I also do really like this film a lot.
But it's definitely worth watching. I really like it a lot.
Such an interesting blend of tones. There's some real screwball energy happening in some of the first 2/3 or so. That's just classic studio comedy stuff, wittiness. But then by the end, it really shifts into something a lot more melancholic, just about the passage of time and just his growing uneasiness about growing old.
Right, definitely.
That I find really cool. Yeah.
Right, mortality and everything, and it really is that blend of drama and realism and comedy, because you've got like Laird Cregar playing the devil essentially, and he's such a formidable persona at first, but he has that lightheartedness to balance it out.
Right. You can see why it would do well with audiences and Oscar voters, even just because it does blend comedy and drama very, very well.
Yeah, and I have a huge amount of respect for movies that can do that.
Yeah. Sometimes the limitations of just the Hays Code sort of prevents it from being as direct as it maybe wants to be, just about what's just some of the plot elements, just about his philandering and some of the stuff with the devil. Feels like there's a few limitations there, but still working within that framework is really good. Yeah.
I think if you threw out the code and made it into a book, it would be a very interesting read.
Ooh, yes. That's very interesting. Yeah. Well, this question was from Gordon at Mark Wahlberg, who said, how do the two Best Picture nominated versions of Heaven Can Wait compare to each other? So kind of not a lot of comparison. Even if it shares the title, it's very different plots. The Warren Beatty version is taking from...
I have not seen
Here Comes Mr. Jordan. Yeah. You haven't seen the Warren Beatty version, you said?
No, I haven't. But but I'm pretty sure it was much better, like, received as far as, like, it did get, nods and stuff, right?
Yep. Basically, that version is taking from Here Comes Mr. Jordan, which was the original play and film, and this is taking the title, this 1943 film, and working with just, hey, here's this guy who has reached the afterlife, and we have to go back and look at what he did in the past and all that. I mean, the Warren Beatty version has him literally inhabiting someone else's body and going back on Earth and doing all this stuff. So it's very, very different.
Right. They did a lot with that concept. They did a lot with that plot, because you got Here Comes Mr. Jordan, and then you got Down to Earth with Rita Hayworth. That I remember really well, and that I like as a film. So yeah, they played around with it a lot. And it's interesting because there aren't too many films that deal with the afterlife and really talk about like the devil, personify him as a character. I always think it's fascinating when they do, so I wish that they had done that more. But the few films that you have that dealt with that subject matter are based on the same thing.
Yeah.
The same material, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah. So I would say this is one of those that are absolutely worth a watch from this lineup.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
So I just want to talk about, moving past all the directing nominees, the Oxbow incident. So this is a mercifully short 1 hour and 15 minutes. Basically the length of a cable drama pilot, essentially. So this has the distinction, actually, of being the most recent Best Picture nominee to only be nominated for Best Picture and no other categories.
Wow.
How about that? Yeah.
I would say it's the one on the list that I want to see the most. I have not seen it, but it was playing at the TCM Classic Film Festival, I want to say last year or the year before, and I was like kicking myself because I didn't get to see it. But I love Henry Fonda, and the plot sounds so good.
Yeah. Directed by William A. Wellman. It's a Western. Henry Fonda and Harry Morgan are playing these two guys who come into this dusty town and become part of this big plan to take revenge on a group of bandits who stole some cattle and killed a rancher. And they find this group of three men with the cattle, and they debate what to do with them, whether or not they should hang them. I really don't want to spoil where things go from there. Like I said, it's only 75 minutes. It's fully on YouTube if you want to pause and watch it now and then come back, because it's not that long, but I recommend it. I think this is a really good economical Western that gets to some really fascinating themes about morals and ethics at a time period where this is taking place in the 1880s, where there was a real focus on just figuring out a sense of morality and this lawlessness of it all. I think it's very haunting and effective in portraying this idea of living with the actions that you take and how do you live with that. So I really like it a lot. I think it deserved a lot more than just Best Picture. Certainly a screenplay nomination would have been deserved. Cinematography is great. Editing, sound. So I'm glad it made it. Obviously, this is the number 10 of the Best Picture nominees that actually made it, just because it didn't have support anywhere else. But highly, highly, highly recommend. And so different from any of these other films.
Yeah, I've heard a lot about how it deals with morality and how it's so unique in the scope of not only a genre, but in film at the time and what people were doing with film. Mm-hmm. So like it's a must see for me. It's like really on my watch list, pretty high up there.
Yeah.
And so like for those reasons, I would think that it's definitely like a contender for a top 5, but I'm really surprised that it sort of just edged its way in.
Yeah, I know. Well, we got multiple questions about this. Juan Carlos Ollano and Stevanis Kustanto both asked us why Oxbow Incident only got a single nomination. So again, I do think the importance of it not seeming like any of the other Best Picture nominees here certainly helped it, I would imagine. It's directed by William A. Wellman, who has a history with the Academy, the first ever Best Picture winner, Wings. So I think those helped it get in, but it might have just been considered a little too slight and, I guess, not contemporary enough for considering what these other nominees were, what they were valuing at that time.
Yeah, I think runtime can kill a film. Like, I love short films. I love films with a shorter runtime. I actually appreciate them perhaps a little more. Like, the 30s is my favorite decade in film, so
Yeah.
A lot of them run like around the 75-minute mark. But yeah, I couldn't really like say why because I haven't seen it personally. But I think in the same sense that comedy never really gets its due, Westerns don't really get their due.
Yeah,
with
it's very hot
with a
and cold.
couple of
yeah,
with a couple of exceptions like The Searchers or something like that. But yeah, that's really from what I know of the film and from all of the good things that I've heard about it, that's really the only reason why I would think is because of its runtime and because it's a Western.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it was just maybe a little too small because it seems, if I don't know the budget, but it seemed pretty low budget. So that can affect things.
That's fair, for sure.
Well, going on the complete opposite end of that, we have For Whom the Bell Tolls. So this is an adaptation of the Ernest Hemingway novel. It is 170 minutes.
Oh my goodness.
Even longer than the Song of Bernadette. And I have to be honest, I feel every minute of it. It's set during the Spanish Civil War. Gary Cooper, Ingrid Bergman, they're just people who are against the fascists, and they're joining up with these guerrilla fighters who are focused on blowing up a bridge. Takes a very long time to blow up that bridge. Let's just say that. Very talky movie. But at the same time, it doesn't really have a lot to say politically. So even though it's very long, I'm not really sure if it goes really into a lot of depth about motivations or anything like that. It does very well with the acting nominees. It gets into every single acting category. Katina Paxidou wins Best Supporting Actress for this. She plays a Spanish woman who's very boisterous and outspoken and a leader type, but also is very fixated about her appearance, just talking about how she's ugly. It's a very classic supporting actress type of winner. The big, bold woman who's full of energy and also a bit stereotypical. This older Spanish woman who's giving the leads advice about life and love, you know what I mean? I think she's good, and she brings some energy to a very dull movie, but it's not really like a super classic supporting actress kind of winner. And I think, like I said, the movie's too long. I think Gary Cooper is very dull here.
I've never really been a big Gary Cooper fan, and that's probably the main reason why I have not seen this film.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think he's pretty dull as a whole.
Yeah.
Sorry, guys. But my question about this, which is interesting, is since the Best Supporting Actress race was such a hot race between two of the actresses from the film that we were discussing, Song of Bernadette, like, how do you think she fared compared to Anne Revere and Gladys Cooper?
She has a lot more screen time, so that can be a little bit of an issue as far as comparing them. Katina is just given so much more to do than either of them. I think I kind of prefer Gladys Cooper, to be honest.
Gladys Cooper was really compelling. I mean, I can't really say, but yeah, screen time definitely does make a difference.
Yeah.
In any race.
Mm-hmm. It's filmed in color. It's very expensive looking, so it looks great. But I just really didn't engage with the story. Maybe if it cut out like at least 40 minutes, then this would have been better. But it makes sense that the film also did very well financially. This is kind of a war film. Gary Cooper, there's romance. It has all the right ingredients based on the Hemingway novel. I just don't know if it really holds up. Anyway.
Yeah, I've heard that it's a good adaptation compared to other adaptations, but I really wouldn't know.
Yeah. I would not personally recommend this one, but we got many questions about Ingrid Bergman here, particularly because she is nominated for Best Actress for For Whom the Bell Tolls, and not Casablanca. And Juan Carlos Zoyano asked that very question, why that happened when Casablanca won Best Picture. Why did Ingrid Bergman get nominated for Whom the Bell Tolls? Well, I think there was a level of her transforming a little bit. Ingrid Bergman, white Ingrid Bergman, transforming into this Spanish woman named Maria for Whom the Bell Tolls. That's obviously a discussion that gets a little dicey, but it's something that can appeal to the Academy. And she's able to delve a little more into her character, maybe more than she does in Casablanca, just because there's so much screen time for her to do that. But this is still a bit of a mystery to me.
For sure.
This was from Jeffrey Kerr saying, had For Whom the Bell Tolls not been released in 1943, would Ingrid Bergman have been nominated for Casablanca instead? Possibly. Probably.
I can't really say anything about For Whom the Bell Tolls, but I am surprised that she wasn't nominated for Casablanca in the first place.
Yeah. It's very strange. But then you also consider that Ingrid Bergman was a lot more passionate about what she was doing in For Whom the Bell Tolls than she was in Casablanca, which she even admitted at the time that she didn't think it was very good. So...
And it's interesting because I think that these Oscar nominations show what they valued from each film.
Mm-hmm.
Like Casablanca, they obviously value Humphrey Bogart's performance and Claude Rains and the director, but I feel like at least maybe that's just my thinking, public perception, Ingrid Bergman takes a back seat, whereas For Whom the Bell Tolls, Bergman, you know what I mean?
Right. That's true.
So maybe I think that's why.
Yeah. But I know there was another potential person who could have gotten in instead that was not nominated. That's Ida Lupino for The Hard Way. She won the New York Film Critics Award for Best Actress, not even nominated at the Oscars.
Yeah, I adore Lupino.
Yeah.
I think she's pretty incredible as an actress.
And a director, yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, she was breaking barriers left and right. I have not seen The Hard Way.
Yeah, me neither.
But yeah,
she was in contention. Yeah.
Yeah, she was like very much a firm fixture at Warner Brothers, and this isn't even the first Lupino, Dennis Morgan, Joan Leslie film I've seen. You know, I've seen other ones with them, but I think that she deserves nominations for everything she's in. She's another one of the actresses that I really feel was snubbed.
Mm-hmm. This is from Catherine Short. Where does For Whom the Bell Tolls stack up among the films that have received nominations in all 4 acting categories? And do you think that any of the actors in the film should have been rewarded? So I would rank this towards the bottom of the films that have received multiple acting nominations in the 4 acting categories. And I don't think any of them should have won.
That's fair, though. I feel like it all depends on the race at that point, like what other films are around, what other films could be nominated. There's always the chance that it happens just sort of by accident.
Yeah.
Like it just happens that way.
Yeah, and this received 9 nominations, including those 4 actors.
Wow.
So it was the second most nominated film of the year, even more than Casablanca. So,
that is surprising.
Yeah. And doesn't really, in my opinion at least, hold up very much comparatively. But your mileage may vary.
Exactly.
Well, we're already running long, so I just want to run through the last 3 Best Picture nominees. Watch on the Rhine is an interesting one, and this is about a German anti-fascist and his wife, his American wife, who go back to her hometown in America to sort of seek safety there, and they move back into her mother's house, and one of the men in the community is working with the German fascists, and he suspects the husband of being a member of this anti-fascist movement. Lots of interesting conflict there. I really like it. It's a very talky film, once again, but it's based on a play by Lillian Hellman. Just seeing the dynamic of the various attitudes at the start of the war is really interesting. You have Sarah's mother, Betty Davis, playing Sarah. Her mother, Fanny, who's this really great socialite, busybody type who doesn't really give a lot of thought to things, but then she has to really confront it when it's in her own home. So that's really interesting. And Lucille Watson gives a really good performance, also nominated for supporting actress. And Paul Lucas wins Best Actor. He's playing Kurt, who is the man who's involved in anti-fascism. Really, really good performance from him. There's a lot of sort of speeches and big proclamations about the state of the world and that sort of thing. And he's very dignified, and he has a very layered performance where you can just see on his face this inner conflict of wanting to be a family unit and keep his family safe, but also feeling that sense of duty to eventually want to go out there and help out the fight again. But then we also have Betty Davis here, who is builds at the top because she is Betty Davis, but is very much like a supporting wife role that is pretty rare for her.
Yeah, I feel like I haven't seen this more as a choice because, oh gosh, I'm going to get a lot of flack for this too. Betty Davis is my least favorite actress of this era. Yeah.
Are you team Joan Crawford?
I was team Joan by default, okay. And then I developed an appreciation for her film after that. All it was more like I like Joan because I don't like Betty Davis. But yeah, I haven't seen it for that reason. But I've seen many Betty Davis films. Yeah. This just hasn't happened to be one of them, but I've heard good things.
Yeah, it's a solid watch. We got this from Andrew Carden saying, did Betty Davis deserve a nomination for Watch on the Rhine? Probably not. I mean, she's doing her thing. She doesn't do a lot of showboating here, so she's pretty restrained, but it's just not really enough material, especially for, I'm sure she would have been in the Best Actress race. That's where she would have been campaigned, but there's just not enough there, so...
I actually have seen the majority of the actress nominees, mm-hmm. And I think all of the ones that I have seen in this particular race tried very hard to get that nomination. Like, you can tell. Yeah. Like, we're gonna talk about it, I'm sure. Greer Garson, like, that's Oscar bait in and of itself. Yeah, totally. And then Jennifer Jones, of course, who won. Mm-hmm. And Jean Arthur really steals The More the Merrier. And Joan Fontaine, of course, she's so well known for The Constant Nymph among many other films. I have such a huge appreciation for Joan Fontaine. Yeah. But yeah, that it was a really tight actress race, and as you say, I don't think there would be room for
which, I mean, she's very well taken care of. She does not need a nomination for this.
Right.
Let's be real. So yeah. Fritz in the Oscars said, Watch on the Rhine, most annoying movie children ever. They're pretty bad, not gonna lie. Not the best movie children. One of them, there's this young boy who's just very advanced for his age and is making all these big observations about life in the worst sort of, I don't know. I do not like those movie children. I would agree. But anyway, let's get to these other Best Picture nominees. We have In Which We Serve, which is co-directed by Noel Coward and David Lean. We certainly talked a whole lot about David Lean on this show, and this was his directorial debut.
I was going to say, I was surprised he was making films that early.
Yep. And this is a British propaganda film about the war. It's a British film that is sneaking into this Hollywood awards ceremony. This is the beginning of one of the first films that are from Britain to really do that. And interesting just mix of battle scenes, and then the home front. Very well edited. I think it actually pairs quite nicely with something like Dunkirk from Christopher Nolan, just telling multiple stories, playing around with story structure. I can't say that war movies are really my thing, but this one is very well done. It also features the great Celia Johnson in her debut role here.
Yeah, I haven't given this one a try, but I think that it definitely sounds like it highlights all of the best parts of what Great Britain was doing for film at the time.
Totally. I don't really have a lot to add to that. I know that was very short, but I can see the bones of what David Lean would become as a director here. Just this really, the tight focus on relationships between people. You really see how that would bear out with something like Brief Encounter. And also just this sense of grandeur. Even though this movie is short, you feel the expensiveness of it all, and just all the great things about David Lean and his epics. So, but we can get to the other one, which is Madame Curie.
This is one that I have seen. I think it is very Oscar baity. Mm-hmm. It checks all those boxes. It's it's a very feminist film for the time anyway. It's a biopic, which always gets the buzz. It has, Brie Larson plays, of course, Marie Curie, who, they show and discuss her discovering these new elements, and it shows like her own mental strain, as well as it really gives a glimpse into her personal relationship with Pierre Curie, played by Walter Pidgeon. And I actually saw this movie fairly recently. I want to say earlier this year. And I had never really seen any Brie Larson Walter Pidgeon pairings. And I think they definitely share some cute scenes, but I would imagine some of their films that they're better known for, like Mrs. Miniver, would be more worth watching. I think you could definitely watch it. It teaches a lot about Marie Curie if you don't know about her, which I didn't really know about her going into it. But it definitely falls flat in some areas as well.
Mm-hmm. I think the best parts of this are just the exploring her navigating this very male-dominated world of science,
which I love.
Yeah. So that's really compelling. I think the romance is a little bit dull overall. There's quite a bit of focus on that, where I feel like I want to be spending more time of her thinking logically and her process.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. I feel like both of them are a little bit dull in this film, and they each need a dynamic screen partner to breathe some life into them.
Yeah.
like Ronald Colman for Greer in Random Harvest, or Joan Bennett for Walter in something like Manhunt. But together it's pretty obvious that they aren't the life of the party.
No, not quite. And even some critics at the time were kind of just mentioning how the most like climactic moment is just them looking at some beakers in a lab. Like that's exactly. The big discovery moment that is all right. Yeah. But I think it's solid. Yeah.
They are very believable together. And I also love that the source material was Eve Curie's memoir of her mother, mm-hmm. and that she was involved in the making of the film as well.
Which can be good or bad when a family member's involved with a biopic.
That's true. That's true.
But I think this is solid. Not one of my favorites, but certainly interesting to see this kind of a focus for a scientific woman. I think this is like, there's not many other films like this in this time period. So
I am not surprised in the slightest that it got some nominations.
Yeah.
Again, it feels very Oscar baity to me. If this movie was made today and not a thing was changed, it would probably get some Oscar nominations as well.
Oh, yeah. Yep. just the nature of the character. You can't, take that
And
away.
exactly, and the story and how female driven it is, and how it discusses like STEM and everything. I think it would do very well in 2020.
For sure. Yeah, good point. Okay, so those are the Best Picture nominees. I know there's a lot to talk about there. Just to wrap up that, we got this question just from Chelsea, who said, most of these films have been lost to the memory of time. Are there 2 or 3 you'd recommend beyond Casablanca? I would recommend The Oxbow Incident. I would recommend The More the Merrier, and Heaven Can Wait, and maybe even The Song of Bernadette. Yeah, so that was like 5, but...
I think I'm kind of in the same boat as you. Really, from what I've seen, the only ones that I can fully say, like, yeah, you should watch it would be, other than Casablanca, really the only one that I would put on for someone else would be Heaven Can Wait.
Mm-hmm.
Just because of like the nature of the film. It's like it's a nice, fun, not boring film to watch.
Yeah.
But because a lot of these do kind of fall into that category a little bit for me. But The More the Merrier's fun. It's a classic, I would say. It's definitely getting a resurgence. And then The Song of Bernadette, I think, is really beautifully made.
Mm-hmm.
If that's your kind of film, I think that you would definitely enjoy it.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
But that's really about it for me.
Yeah.
The Oxbow Incident is one that I really want to see.
Put it at the top of your watch list. Yeah.
Yeah, it really is. Like I definitely want to check that one out. But I can't recommend it yet.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's get to our Should Have Been a Contender segment. This is where we talk about any other film from 1943 that we think deserved a little more credit. And we can talk about 1 or 2. Like I said, we're running quite long. So if you have 1 or 2 at the top of your list, Samantha?
Absolutely. Sticking to 1 or 2, I would say if you held the Oscars honoring the films of 1943 in 2020, I honestly believe that Cry Havoc would have secured many nominations. Mm-hmm. It blows my mind that it did not earn any. It's very surprising to me. Beautiful film, completely female driven, really emotional, really relatable and realistic, and all of the performances are fantastic. And then the other one I think that is so culturally significant that should have gotten some Oscar buzz, but of course didn't for, I would say, pretty obvious reasons. Stormy Weather. Hindsight's 2020, but looking back, it's so easy to see that this film was a lot more deserving of praise from Hollywood than most of what was honored this year. Again, the cultural impact of Stormy Weather is so significant, and this film was doing things that no other work dared to try. Like the scenes with the Nicholas brothers and Lena Horne, they're just incredible, and it's still so discussed as one of the best racial films of the time. Yeah. So I would have loved to see it get some nominations.
And then speaking of that, you also have Cabin in the Sky, which is doing similar things.
Absolutely. Yeah. I didn't even think of Cabin in the Sky, but yeah.
Well, one that I want to talk about is an RKO film that really did not have any real Oscar buzz. This says that it came out in 1942, but multiple sources say it was eligible for 1943. So I'm just gonna, it's like a Casablanca situation where I'm just gonna be like, all right, we'll talk about it now. And that is Cat People.
Ooh, yes. I love that choice.
Yes. Horror movie from RKO. It's about a woman who is born in Serbia, who's now living in America, who is haunted by her past. She believes that she comes from this lineage of this tribe of people who turn into panthers, and she's scared that this new man she meets, that she might kill him if he kisses her. So this might be classified as a B movie, but it's a very carefully crafted B movie with beautiful cinematography. The use of light and shadow, they just create this level of dread where we don't actually see anything shocking. It's all about building tension, and you you as the viewer are imagining something that's probably so much more terrifying than what they could have created at this period of time. And there's just so many tense sequences here involving this other woman named Alice, who's involved with the man that Irina is involved with. She's walking home at night alone and just terrified that someone is following her. The scene where Alice is at the swimming pool and it's so dark and she can't see what's happening. It's all just sounds and darkness and shadows. Really scary stuff and haunting imagery, and it comes in at a merciful 73 minutes, and it gets in, it gets out, and is really great. Really, really great. Totally recommend it.
I think it's one of the better studio horror films,
Yes.
and it's so unique and it's so fascinating. And forgive me if I butcher her name. I know it's either Simone or Simone Simon. I've heard both.
Yeah, I don't know.
She's brilliant. She's absolutely brilliant. She's so magnetic. And yeah,
cat-like, and very cat-like.
Cat-like,
so that helps.
For sure. I love seeing her in this movie. That's a movie I actually want to revisit now that you mention it. I really want to see that again. If again, it's the genre. Like, Westerns never get their due, comedies never get their due, musicals never get their due, horror never.
It's even worse. Yeah, I know.
Yeah, horror never gets its due.
Still doesn't get its due. Yeah.
But if it did, this would have been very cool to see nominated. I definitely agree with you.
At the very least, cinematography and sound would have been
That would have been so cool. I mean, even actress, that would have been so interesting to see her get a nomination because she really commands the film. I love that. Great choice.
Thank you. Yeah. And that's pretty much the one I wanted to talk about. But if you just want to list any others that you would recommend for people, I don't know if you had like a longer list.
The only two that I had that I didn't mention, A Guy Named Joe, really tender, heartfelt film that's still considered a favorite of Steven Spielberg. Yeah. So as far as, again, cultural impact, I think that's a big one. And then Lassie Come Home, which is a little bit of a left field choice. It's definitely understandable why it didn't earn any Oscar buzz at the time, but when you look at its impact on the history of pop culture and film in the 20th century, I would have thrown it a bone, for lack of a better phrase.
Yes.
But the first film in Lassie series, it really holds up if you haven't seen it. So I would definitely recommend it.
Yeah. Well,
but that's about it for me.
Yeah. That's a very varied group of films to recommend.
It is because I feel like a lot of the films that were nominated have a lot of similarities.
Right.
So to throw a couple of curveballs in would have been really interesting, like Cat People and, and Stormy Weather and Cry Havoc. So
very good. All right. Loved diving into this year in particular.
Me too.
Yeah. So when we come back, we'll be delivering our verdict as to whether we think Casablanca deserved Best Picture or if The Song of Bernadette deserved it more.
In Los Angeles, Greer Garson presents the famous Oscar to Jennifer Jones, star of The Song of Bernadette. This is the 16th annual award by the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. George Murphy presents the coveted little man to Paul Lucas for his outstanding performance in Watch on the Rhine. Teresa Wright makes the award to Katina Paxanou for her excellent supporting role in For Whom the Bell Tolls. For Best Supporting Actor, Donald Crisp hands it to Charles Coburn in The More the Merrier. Universal led the color division with Phantom of the Opera. Jack Benny sponsors another best to Jack Warner for producing Casablanca.
And we're back. So now we'll be delivering our verdict as to whether we think Casablanca deserved Best Picture or if The Song of Bernadette earned it more. Samantha, what is your verdict?
I think there's no question. I think Casablanca very rightfully earned Best Picture. As we mentioned, these other films that should have gotten at least a nomination. But I think out of the films that were nominated, Casablanca without a doubt. Song of Bernadette is good, and I think that it's definitely a contender As far as the nominees go, it's definitely, I would say second or third out of the 10, but Casablanca is number one in any race.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for me, Casablanca is number one with a bullet. I mean, no film here even really compares to it. I would say the Oxbow incident might, I wouldn't even say come close. I would say just it would be another film that would be worthy of that. But Casablanca 1000% has held up to the history, obviously, and was a great choice at the time and remains one of the best choices that the Academy ever made. And knowing that it actually wasn't a frontrunner makes it, for me, even more satisfying that it did win. So that's that.
I absolutely agree.
Song of Bernadette, very solid film, would recommend, but not really quite on that echelon. So there you go. That's 1943 at the Oscars, and I think this was a fantastic episode. Thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. It's a lot of fun to discuss the whole year and the cultural impact of 1943. I loved it.
Yeah. Well, I really, really appreciated this discussion. So tell the people where they can find more from you on the internet.
Well, you can find my blog at musingsofaClassicFilmAddict.com. You can find my Cooking with the Stars post every month where I test and review the recipes of classic film stars at ClassicMovieHub.com. And you can follow me on Twitter at ClassicFilmGeek.
Very good. And you can find me on Twitter at Kevin_Jacobson. The show is at Oscar Runner Up. Go to any podcast platform of your choice, and I'll probably be there. And you can rate, review, and subscribe. And if you like this and you want to hear even more, go to patreon.com/andtherunnerup for bonus episodes. And this is my season finale. And I want to thank you, Samantha, for really making it a good one, really. And I will be back in July, so I'm taking a month off, with 1942 at the Oscars as I finish off this wonderful experiment of now talking about the first 15 years of Oscar history. So once again, thank you.
Thank you. It was such an honor to be part of the season finale. That's wonderful.
Yes, indeed. And for now, I will bid you all adieu.